So now we're going to solve Dino deposit. We've been told that 5 velociraptors, V, W, X, Y, and Z, are going to go into one of 3 museums, A, B, or C. So we're going to set up our groups as A, B, or C, and then move on to our rules. Our first rule is that W and Z are not going to go into the same museum. Then we're told that if V goes in Museum A, X will go in Museum C. And then we're told that V and Y must go into the exact same museum, so they're going to go in a box because they're going to go into the same museum. Now, to take the contrapositive of Rule 2, we would say if X isn't in Museum C, then V is not in Museum A. But what does that mean? Well, let's translate that first part. If X is not in C, well, it means it's going in A or B, because if you're not in C, you're going to be in A and B, A or B. So if X is going in A or B, then what happens? Well, then we've been told that V doesn't go in A. Well, if V doesn't go in A, that means V is going in B or C. So we can just shorthand our contrapositive using positive language. So instead of X is forbidden from C, we'll turn that into when X is in A or B, therefore V has to go in B or C. In other words, it's not going in A. And if you just take the straight contrapositive of when X is not in C, V doesn't have A, that's okay too for now. We also put a yellow dot above each variable as it was mentioned, and so checking for floaters, we see that every variable was used, so there are no floaters. Now, checking for our first rule that W and Z are separated, we can eliminate answer choice A. We can also eliminate answer choice D. Our next rule says that when V is in A, X goes to C, and that eliminates answer choice E. Then we're looking at answer choices B and C, and we can clearly see that Museum B is empty for answer choice C. So we should check our stimulus again and see if there was an at least rule. And sure enough, we were told that there has to be at least one in each museum, so answer choice C is out, leaving us with answer choice B. We'll also add that rule to our rule list that there has to be at least one, which we use those 2 little L's to show at least one. We're also going to go ahead and copy that game board down into our first game board. And lastly, looking at this game board, we can see that the V and A forces the X into C. But looking at our W and our Z pieces, we notice that they don't have any rules besides the fact that they must be separated. So in some sense, we can think of these as wildcard floater pieces. They just are separated, and if that's the case, we can just put a box with a switch to note for future game board use that the W and Z can actually switch off. Now, questions 2 and 3 ask us questions about blanket statements, that is, things that apply to all of our game boards, and so we're going to skip those 2 and move to question 4 first before coming back to 2 and 3. So we're going to go ahead and put Walter in A, put Y in C, and looking at our rule 3, we're going to have to make that block, and so we're going to put V with Y in C. And now we'll keep track of what variables remain, and we have the X and the Z that still needs to be placed. We know that W and Z can't be kept together, so we have to put a big not Z above our A. We can note that Z can go in either B or C, and the X is still free to float at this point. Now, looking at our rules, we might be worried about Rule 2, V and A commands X into C, but we can quickly look at that sufficient condition, right? What does a sufficient condition mean? If V is in A, something else is going to happen. But we're not risking this at all. The V has already been put into C. So, in effect, Rule 2 is already completely canceled out. We don't need to worry about Rule 2 because we're not worried about that sufficient condition. We're not worried about V going into A. V has already been placed. Velma is going to be in Museum C. What does that mean? It means the X isn't going to be commanded anywhere. We're not going to satisfy the sufficient condition for 2, which means X is going to be basically free to float at this point. All we have to do is find someone to go into Museum B because of Rule 4, the at least one rule. And just through process of elimination, Velma is not going in B, it's already been placed. Velma is not going in A, she has already been placed. Walter is in A while Zoe and Xander are in C. We can't have that be true because we need one of Z or X to go into space B. And answer choice E says that Walter and Zoe are in Museum A, and we know that W and Z cannot go into the same group, leaving only answer choice D, that Xander is in Museum B, and certainly X can go into Museum B. That makes it a could be true. Well, if we put Walter into C by himself, we now want to look at our VY block, because getting our blocks on the board is going to put a significant number of our game pieces down, and that will always be our goal. We can't put the VY block in C, and if we put the VY block in A, it's going to force the X into C, and that's not allowed, so the only place for it is under B. And taking stock of who's left, we have Z and X both available, and someone needs to go in A, so one of them is going to go under A, and the other one, we don't know where it's going. But as far as all of the options for Y, well, just B. Now, looking at this next question, question 3, a completely determined question, which we'll take next, we should think about how a good completely determined answer is going to put all of our pieces into place. And looking at our rule list, there should be one rule that pops out at you, making this game difficult, and that's rule 2. We need to put V in A to force X into C. At least if that's possible, that's what we're going to want to try and do. Now, looking at our answer choices, we won't see V getting forced anywhere. However, we do see Y getting forced into A in the last answer choice E. So we know if Y is forced into A, it's going to have to bring the V with it. And YVW in A is a very strong start for a completely determined question. Then we ask, what do we have left? Well, the V in A forces X into Museum C, and that means that Z has to take up the last spot in Museum B because we need to have at least one piece in that museum. So all in all, for a completely determined question like this, we should immediately look at our conditional rules, because if those aren't triggered, we're not going to be completely determined. So once we find that we need to trigger that rule, we should find immediately answer choice E, and also our other answer choices, pretty quickly we're not going to be able to move anything into place, and so if we feel stuck like that, it's not the right answer to a completely determined question. We want to be moving, we want to be pushing pieces into place, and that's how we find answer choice E. And last, we're asked to list all the places Velma could go. Well, we see in questions 1 and 3, Velma could go in Museum A. We see in question 5 that Velma can go in Museum B. And we see in question 4 that Velma was allowed in Museum C. So the correct answer of where could Velma go, list all possibilities. Well, Velma can go in Museums A, B, and C.